Welcome back. In this segment, we will explore how the various free speech theories have been integrated in a number of global public policy initiatives. I will present those initiatives and highlight how the concept related to the protection of freedom of expression and information have been made central to those public policies. The earlier free speech theories that we have discussed were largely theories about censorship and what censorship prohibits and denies: human autonomy, ability to make moral judgment, dignity. It prohibits the search for truth. Freedom of expression, on the other hand, builds tolerance and is essential to self-governing societies and to good governance in general, to the ability of governments to implement good policies. The notions of autonomy, good governance, self-development, truth, they all have, in one way or another, largely survived the time, and they have gone global. I have already mentioned the fact that courts around the world repeatedly link the protection of freedom of expression to the working of a democracy. The importance of accessing information and speaking freely, particularly, but not only, with regard to democracy and governance, has been put forward and highlighted time and time again. This is not just a brilliant political theory or philosophy, or indeed, in the case of Amartya Sen, a brilliant economic thesis. These have been largely evidenced as well and upheld by international and national institutions, including, as I have mentioned, courts around the world, but not only. It has also become an essential feature of the legislative framework of the majority of countries around the world, which have, for instance, adopted access to public information laws and protected freedom of expression in their constitution, using very much similar concepts and terms as those that I have highlighted before. But let me just highlight a few examples of global public policies as opposed to a national legislation or a national court. First, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, also referred to as the Rio Declaration, is a culmination of the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development. And it states, and I'm quoting from them, "Environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at all relevant levels. At the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by public authorities. And they shall have the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. State shall facilitate and encourage public awareness and participation by making information widely available. Effective access to judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy, shall be provided." So here you have a central document, part of the commitment of the world to address environmental issues and indeed climate change, that put heavy emphasis on the ability of global citizens to access information and on the duty of governments to provide that information to them so that they know what is happening in their environment. More recently, the Sustainable Development Goal, or SDG, as they have come to be known, were adopted by the United Nations in September 2015. They seek to stimulate actions over the next 15 years in areas that have been deemed of critical importance for humanity and the planet. They build on the MDG, the Millennium Development Goal, and complete what these did not manage to achieve. They seek to realize the human rights of all and to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. They are integrated and indivisible and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, social, and environmental. And those SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, include, and I quote from them, to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels, to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels, to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedom in accordance with national legislation and international agreement. The two indicators against which governments will have to report include, for instance, the number of verified cases of killing, kidnapping, and forced disappearance, arbitrary detention and torture of journalists, associated media personnel, trade unionists, and human rights advocates. And they are also requested to report back on the implementation of constitutional, statutory, and/or policy guarantees for public access to information. So here what you have are within the most important public policy document of the decade, the forthcoming decade, the SDGs, you have centrally placed the necessity for government, the duty imposed of governments to protect freedom of expression and information, and the obligations to report back on how they are doing in terms of protecting that access to information and the ability of the press to do its work. That's a very important symbol, I think, of the centrality recognized to freedom of expression and information by the world, by the United Nations and the member state. The inclusion of information in the Sustainable Development Goal owe a great deal, if not exclusively, at least largely, to civil society organizations. I know that because I was part of the debates when SDGs were, at the beginning at least, being debated. And there were a few opposition to the idea that information and expression were central to sustainable development. However, very quickly, we have referred back to the thinking and writing of eminent thinkers, backed up by economic data, including from Amartya Sen, for instance, to demonstrate that information and expression are indeed central to sustainable development. And in all those instances, in all those arguments, we have used what was written back in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century to demonstrate that information and expression, autonomy, dignity, and truth are as relevant now to human society as they were in the time they were first thought out. Civil society organizations have widely circulated the notion, for instance, that information is the oxygen of democracy, essential for development, openness, accountability, and good governance. Civil society has played probably one of the most important roles in globalizing this concept, in globalizing the link between individual development, self-development, economic development, and good governance, and integrating those links and those concepts in the positions and practices of global institutions such as the United Nations, of global decision-making such as the SDGs, and indeed of national government. For instance, the organization I had the great honor of leading for 9 years, Article 19, focused heavily on developing policy and practical steps linking development with freedom of expression and information. Let me quote from one of Article 19 earlier report, which summarizes well the importance of freedom of expression and information to the fight against poverty and for sustainable development. Chernobyl and earlier nuclear accidents, the spread of AIDS throughout the world, have contributed to the realization that full freedom of information is not a luxury, but may be literally a matter of life and death. The denial of information, vital to health, such as arises from the dumping of unlabeled pesticide and pharmaceuticals in the developing world, for example, is censorship to be opposed just as much as the more classic manifestation of censorship in book banning, radio jamming, or the destruction of printing press.